I am Julian. I am 25 years old. Exactly 1 month ago, I returned home from the absolute most important business trip of my entire life, only to find everything I owned, every single piece of my existence, stuffed into heavy-duty black garbage bags and dumped unceremoniously at our front gate. My dad stood there on the driveway, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes completely devoid of warmth or paternal affection. He looked at me, a son who had done nothing but try to earn his love, and he said, "You are 25. Get out now. You are a burden to this family." I stood there on the pavement, my heart pounding violently against my ribs, while my older brother smirked right beside him, completely enjoying the humiliation. They threw me away like actual trash in broad daylight, right in front of our neighbors. But there is one thing they did not know. The flashy new tech company my family was betting their entire financial future on had a fatal flaw, and the corporate executive who was quietly acquiring all of their toxic debt was me. And now, after throwing me into the street and treating me like dirt, they are desperately blowing up my phone, begging for a lifeline. Before I tell you exactly what happened and how I dismantled their perfect little world, hit that like button if you believe in absolute justice. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comment section below. Your support means everything to me and helps me share this journey. Now, let us go back to where this nightmare actually began. The wind in Albuquerque had been warm and full of promise, but the air in Des Moines felt like a physical slap across the face as I stepped out of the rideshare vehicle in front of my childhood home. The sky was a bruised, heavy gray, perfectly matching the sudden sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. I had just closed a massive $2 million deal for my tech startup. It was the biggest professional milestone of my life. My boss had patted me on the back, promised a massive promotion, and for the first time in my 25 years on this earth, I felt like I was actually worth something. I felt like a winner. I had stopped at an upscale boutique near the Albuquerque hotel before my flight back to Iowa. Sitting in the passenger seat of the car, and now clutched carefully in my hands, were 3 beautifully wrapped boxes. I had bought a heavy silver fountain pen for my father. I had purchased a pure silk scarf for my mother. I had even bought a hand-stitched leather-bound journal for my older brother Marcus. I honestly thought these gifts, paid for by my hard-earned salary, would finally be the key to unlocking the one thing I had chased my entire life: my family's approval. I wanted them to look at me and finally see a successful man, not just the family disappointment. I walked up the long, sweeping driveway of our Sherman Hill home, the gravel crunching under my dress shoes. I adjusted my laptop bag on my shoulder, ready to walk through the front door and announce my victory. Then I stopped completely dead in my tracks. Piled up against the heavy wrought iron front gate were 10 massive, heavy-duty black garbage bags. They were tied haphazardly, bulging awkwardly with various shapes. From one of them, the sleeve of my favorite gray hoodie was poking out, caught and ripped in the plastic tear. A thick stack of my coding books was spilling out of another bag, the pages fluttering wildly in the cold Iowa breeze. My stomach completely bottomed out. The world tilted on its axis, the blood rushing out of my head. I recognized my desk lamp. I recognized my running shoes. The heavy oak front door of the house opened, and my father Victor walked out. He did not look surprised to see me standing there. In fact, he looked like a man who had been waiting for a scheduled delivery. He walked down the driveway with heavy, deliberate steps. Right behind him was Marcus. Marcus was 30 years old, the undisputed golden child of the family, and a man who had never faced a single consequence for his actions in his entire life. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I could not comprehend what I was looking at. My brain refused to process the visual information. My dad did not even blink. He did not show an ounce of hesitation or regret. "You are a burden, Julian. It is time for you to go." "You packed my stuff while I was across the country?" I pointed at the garbage bags. My hands were shaking so violently I had to ball them into tight fists, and pressed them against my thighs to hide the tremor. You did not even give me a phone call? You did not give me a 30-day warning? You just threw my life on the dirt. You are 25 years old, my dad snapped, his voice sharp and loud enough for Mrs. Higgins, the neighbor walking her golden retriever across the street, to pause and stare openly at us. Marcus was on his own years ago. We have carried you long enough. You need to figure it out and stand on your own 2 feet. I looked over at Marcus. I was desperately looking for any sign of empathy, any trace of brotherhood, any indication that he thought this was wrong. Instead, Marcus leaned casually against the brick pillar of the gate, checked the time on his expensive watch, and shrugged his shoulders indifferently. Grow up, Julian. You are holding us back from reaching our full potential. Good luck out there. I looked up past them toward the second-floor window of the master bedroom. The heavy curtain twitched. My mother, Sylvia, was standing right there in the shadows. She was watching her youngest son get thrown out into the street like a stray dog, and she did not have the courage or the basic maternal instinct to come downstairs and look me in the eye. They had orchestrated this entire event. They had deliberately waited until I was out of state, working my fingers to the bone to build a career, to permanently erase me from their perfect little lives without having to deal with the messy, emotional fallout of an argument. The pain blooming in my chest was so sharp and intense, I genuinely thought I was having a heart attack. A normal person might have screamed. I could have kicked the bags over. I could have demanded to go inside and get the rest of my belongings, or at least demanded a proper explanation. But as I looked at my father's cold, calculating eyes and my brother's arrogant, punchable smirk, something deep inside of me just snapped cleanly in half. The lifelong desperation to be loved, the pathetic need to prove myself to people who despised me, completely evaporated. It was replaced by a terrifying, crystal-clear calmness. It was the kind of clarity that only comes when you realize you have absolutely nothing left to lose. I did not yell. I did not drop a single tear. I looked right into my father's eyes, holding his gaze until he slightly shifted his weight in discomfort, and I gave him a slow, deliberate, chilling smile. I turned around without saying another word. I walked back to my beat-up sedan parked on the street, opened the door, tossed the luxury gift bags from Albuquerque into the back seat, and got in the driver's seat. I started the engine and pulled away from the curb without looking in the rearview mirror even once. I did not know where I was going to sleep that night, but I knew with absolute certainty I was never going to beg those people for anything ever again. To truly understand the absolute cruelty of that moment at the gate, to comprehend why a family would discard their own flesh and blood like yesterday's trash, you have to understand the invisible toxic hierarchy of my childhood home. Growing up in the affluent Sherman Hill neighborhood, our house was pristine. It looked like a picture from a real estate magazine. But inside those freshly painted walls, it was a psychological battleground where the rules were entirely rigged, and I was the designated loser from the moment I was born. Marcus was the shining star. He was 5 years older than me, louder, infinitely more charismatic, and absolutely ruthless when it came to manipulating my parents to get what he wanted. He was the classic golden child. When Marcus graduated high school, my parents proudly liquidated a significant portion of their 401k retirement fund just to buy him a brand new car and threw a massive catered party in the backyard. They set up a massive college fund for him, ensuring he graduated debt-free. When I graduated 4 years later, with higher grades and several academic awards, they handed me a generic greeting card with a $20 bill inside and explicitly told me I needed to start paying rent immediately if I wanted to continue sleeping in my childhood bedroom. There was no party. There was no college fund left for me. I paid $500 a month to my parents just to exist in that house. I paid for my own groceries, keeping my food on a designated bottom shelf in the refrigerator. I was the unpaid live-in handyman. I fixed the leaky plumbing in the guest bathroom. I rewired the garage door opener when it broke in the middle of winter. I mowed the massive lawn every single Saturday morning without fail. I was essentially an ATM and a servant. Meanwhile, Marcus lived in a luxurious downtown apartment. I found out years later that my parents had secretly paid the massive down payment for that apartment. When I accidentally discovered the bank statements and confronted my father, he simply waved me off and called it a necessary investment in Marcus's boundless potential. I chose a very different path from my brother. I loved coding. I loved the quiet, undeniable logic of computers, where inputs always matched outputs, unlike the chaotic, conditional love of my family. I took a job as a junior developer at a small, scrappy tech startup in the East Village, instead of pursuing a traditional corporate firm. To my family, this was the ultimate embarrassment. I was a massive failure because I did not wear a tailored suit to work and did not have a fancy, recognizable job title to brag about at their country club dinners. I remember our Thanksgiving dinner last year vividly. It is burned into my memory as the exact moment I realized how deeply they despised my existence. The dining room table was loaded with a massive turkey, homemade cranberry sauce, and the finest expensive wine my parents could afford. Marcus held court at the head of the table, talking loudly and aggressively about a revolutionary new app he was developing. He used a lot of flashy buzzwords: venture capital, scalability, blockchain integration, angel investors. It sounded incredibly impressive to my parents, until you realized he had absolutely no actual working prototype and could not write a single line of code himself. He was just selling hot air and grand illusions. "That is my boy," my dad had said, raising his crystal wine glass, his eyes shining with absolute unfiltered adoration. "Marcus is going to change the entire tech industry. We are looking at the next major CEO." I sat silently at the far end of the table, cutting my meat quietly, trying to make myself as small as possible. But a foolish part of me still wanted to participate in the family. "I actually just optimized our main search algorithm at work this week," I offered tentatively, hoping to share a small piece of my own professional life. "It increased our user retention by 20%. My boss was really impressed and is letting me lead the new client pitch." My mother Sylvia sighed. It was a heavy, dramatic, long-suffering sound. She deliberately set her expensive silver fork down on her porcelain plate. "Julian, please. We are trying to have a nice, elegant holiday dinner. Absolutely no one here wants to hear about your little computer hobbies or your struggling little office. Your brother is talking about building a real career and a real empire." I gripped my linen napkin under the table until my knuckles turned completely white. I swallowed the thick, painful lump in my throat and stayed completely silent for the rest of the night. That was my designated role in the family dynamic. The shadow, the ghost, the audience member for Marcus's grand play. But at work, I was definitely not a ghost. Our startup was desperately racing against a much larger, incredibly well-funded rival company, and every single day in the office was an absolute sprint. I worked 50, sometimes 60 hours a week. I thrived in the high-pressure chaos. However, there was a guy named Derek on my development team. Derek was a smooth talker, a corporate snake very much like Marcus, who constantly tried to take credit for my late-night coding sessions. He would aggressively swoop into board meetings and present my data analysis as his own brilliant ideas. But my boss, a tough, highly experienced, no-nonsense guy named Greg, saw right through Derek's polished act. Greg pulled me aside into his office one Tuesday afternoon, closing the glass door behind him. "Julian," Greg said, handing me a massive, heavy file folder filled with financial projections. "We have a critical make-or-break pitch in Albuquerque next week. If we land the specific client, the company is completely set for the next 5 years. We will secure our Series B funding. I do not want Derek talking to them. He is all flash and no substance. I want you in that room. You built the back-end architecture from scratch. You know the code better than anyone. You go to New Mexico and you sell it." I was absolutely ecstatic. I went home that night vibrating with nervous energy and pride. But the moment I walked through the heavy oak front door, my father ambushed me in the kitchen, blocking my path to the stairs. "Julian, good. You are finally home," Victor said, not even bothering to look up from reading the news on his iPad. "We are hosting a massive engagement party for Marcus and his new girlfriend this weekend. The catering company just backed out due to an emergency. I need you to stay home, set up the massive event tents in the backyard, handle the industrial grill, and manage the drink station. It is going to take all weekend, starting tomorrow morning." I froze, staring at him in disbelief. "Dad, I can't do that. I'm flying to Albuquerque tomorrow morning. My company specifically selected me to lead a massive client pitch to a major conglomerate. It is the biggest opportunity of my entire career. If I land this, I could get a huge promotion and a massive salary increase." Victor finally looked up from his screen, his eyes narrowing in absolute disgust and irritation. "That is fine, Julian, but the engagement party is significantly more important. Marcus is counting on us to deliver a perfect event. Your little startup job is not going anywhere important anyway. Just call in sick. Tell them you have the flu. Be a team player for your family for once in your selfish life." The sheer, unadulterated audacity of his demand physically knocked the wind out of me. He genuinely wanted me to throw away my entire career, to destroy my professional reputation, just to flip burgers and serve drinks for his favorite son's party. For the first time in my entire life, standing in that pristine kitchen, I found my spine. "No," I said. My voice trembled slightly, but I locked eyes with him and held my ground firmly. "I am going to Albuquerque. I am not missing this pitch for a party." My father's face went dark, angry red. The veins in his neck bulged. "If you walk out that door tomorrow, Julian, do not expect us to celebrate, or even care when your little hobby project fails miserably." I did not argue further. I walked upstairs to my room, packed my suitcase with my best suit, and left the house before the sun even came up the next morning. Albuquerque was an absolute revelation. I stood in a massive, high-rise, glass-walled boardroom facing Harrison, the formidable CEO of a major tech conglomerate. My palms were sweating profusely, but the moment I opened my laptop and started talking about the intricate logic of the code, the fear completely vanished. I countered every single aggressive objection his executives threw at me. I ran a flawless, lightning-fast live demo of our software. When the brutal 2-hour presentation ended, Harrison stood up, walked across the long mahogany table, and shook my hand firmly. "You have a truly brilliant mind, Julian," Harrison said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "We are signing the contract today. Your boss is incredibly lucky to have you on his team." We closed a $2 million deal on the spot. As I walked out of the building, my phone buzzed with a frantic text message from Greg. "You absolutely crushed it. Massive promotion and a massive salary bump waiting for you when you get back to the office. VP level, Julian." I was flying incredibly high. I bought the expensive gifts at the airport boutique, spending money I knew I would soon have. I excitedly texted my mother. "Nailed the pitch. Huge news for my career. Can't wait to celebrate with you guys when I land." She never replied. I stared at the phone for hours during the flight, telling myself she was just incredibly busy cleaning up after Marcus's spectacular party. I told myself that when I showed them the new staggering salary numbers on my new contract, they would finally look at me the way they looked at Marcus. I was an absolute fool. I was a desperate, naive, pathetic fool, chasing the phantom approval of toxic people who had already decided I was completely worthless. And the exact moment I saw those black garbage bags piled up at the gate in the cold Iowa air, the heavy blinders finally came off my eyes for good. The very first night after being thrown out was undeniably the hardest. I drove aimlessly around the dark, quiet streets of Des Moines with absolutely no destination in mind, my tires humming a depressing rhythm on the cold asphalt. My entire life, 25 years of existence, was packed into 10 cheap plastic bags sitting in the trunk and the back seat of my sedan. I eventually parked behind a glowing 24-hour Walmart on the edge of town. the harsh neon lights casting long shadows across the dashboard. I sat there, my hands still gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. The silence inside the car was physically suffocating. I pulled out my phone, scrolling past the completely empty message threads from my parents and Marcus, and called Nolan, my best friend from my college days. He picked up on the second ring, sounding sleepy. When I choked out the humiliating words, "They kicked me out, Nolan. My stuff is in garbage bags in a Walmart parking lot." Nolan did not ask a single probing question. He did not ask what I did wrong. He just read me his address and told me the door was unlocked. I slept on Nolan's incredibly cramped, lumpy living room sofa for an entire agonizing week. The physical and psychological toll of the family betrayal was immense. I woke up every single morning with a tight, aching chest, my eyes burning from unshed tears, forcing myself to put on a wrinkled suit and drive to the office to pretend my entire world had not just violently imploded. At work, my new official title was Vice President of Development. But inside, I felt like an absolute fraud, a homeless imposter playing dress-up. Clara, a brilliant, fiercely observant, and deeply kind data analyst on my team, noticed my downward spiral immediately. I was staring blankly at a complex string of code on my monitor one rainy Wednesday afternoon, my mind thousands of miles away, when she gently dropped a fresh, steaming cup of coffee on my desk. "You are wearing the exact same blue tie you wore on Monday and Tuesday, Julian," Clara said softly, pulling up an empty chair and sitting down next to me. "And you look like you haven't slept more than 2 hours in a decade. You are shaking. Talk to me right now." I looked at her kind eyes, and the dam just broke. I broke down right there in the open plan office and told her everything in a hushed, trembling voice. The gate, the harsh words, the garbage bags, the Walmart parking lot, sleeping on the terrible sofa. Clara did not offer me hollow, useless pity. She did not give me platitudes about family. She immediately pulled up her laptop, opened a dozen browser tabs, and started relentlessly searching real estate rental listings. By the end of her lunch break, she had found me a tiny, run-down studio apartment in a highly questionable, noisy neighborhood on the other side of the city. The monthly rent was cheap, but the landlord demanded first month, last month, and a heavy security deposit up front due to my lack of recent rental history. Handing over that cashier's check completely drained the last $2,000 I had in my emergency savings account. My new high salary had not kicked in yet. I was completely broke. I moved into the apartment on a gloomy Saturday afternoon. I had absolutely no furniture, no bed, just a cheap, leaky air mattress I bought at a discount store. I bought a single frying pan, a cheap plastic spatula, and a pack of plastic forks from the dollar store down the street. I lived exclusively on instant ramen noodles and canned black beans, meticulously tracking every single penny I spent on a complex Excel spreadsheet. I was surviving, breathing in the smell of old dust and cheap cleaning products, but the heavy ghost of my father's cruel voice, "You are a burden," echoed relentlessly off the peeling paint of the studio walls every single night as I stared up at the ceiling in the dark. Exactly 2 weeks later, the ultimate, unforgivable betrayal hit me like a runaway freight train. I was sitting at my makeshift desk, which was actually just a cardboard box flipped upside down, drinking cheap instant coffee when an automated alert popped up on my phone screen. It was an email notification from a local luxury real estate website I had absent-mindedly subscribed to months ago when I was idly dreaming of eventually buying a nice place of my own. It was a new listing for a house in Sherman Hill. My house. The family home. The massive red banner across the top of the main photo read, "Sold over asking price. Exclusive all-cash offer. Closed." My heart completely stopped beating in my chest. The air left my lungs. I clicked the link, my hands shaking so violently I actually dropped my phone onto the hard wooden floor. I scrambled to pick it up and read the detailed description. The house was gone. sold to a wealthy, out-of-state developer for $750,000. Here is the crucial context you absolutely need to understand to grasp the magnitude of this crime. That house was not just my parents' property to sell. It originally belonged to my late grandfather. Before he passed away, right after his funeral, his lawyer gathered us to read an ironclad will. The legal document explicitly stated that the house was a generational asset. If the house was ever sold, the equity was legally required to be split equally into 3 portions, between my parents, Marcus, and me. That house was my legal inheritance. It was my financial safety net. It was my future. I immediately called Fiona, the high-end local real estate agent whose smiling, overly tanned face was plastered all over the listing. She had known my family for over 20 years and had attended my grandfather's funeral. "Fiona, it is Julian Price," I said, my voice dangerously calm, the kind of calm that precedes a massive explosion. "I just saw the listing online. What the hell is going on?" "Oh, Julian, honey," Fiona stammered, her cheerful professional tone completely vanishing, replaced by deep, awkward discomfort. I honestly assumed you knew all about this. We closed the deal 3 days ago. Your parents were in such a massive, desperate rush to liquidate the property, the buyers offered a full cash buyout, and they jumped on it." "Why the desperate rush, Fiona?" I demanded, my knuckles turning completely white as I gripped the phone, pacing the small confines of my studio. Fiona hesitated, lowering her voice as if she was afraid someone was listening. "Julian, your dad told me they needed the massive capital injection immediately. They used a huge chunk of the money right away to buy Marcus a brand new, fully loaded Porsche 911 for his 30th birthday last week, and the rest of the hundreds of thousands went straight into a corporate account to fund Marcus's new tech startup company. I am so terribly sorry, Julian. I wouldn't have processed it, but your dad showed me the legal paperwork. He said you had officially signed away your legal rights to the equity last year to help support your brother's dream." The room violently spun around me. Bile rose in my throat. I had never, ever signed away anything. I had never seen a legal document regarding the house since the funeral. My parents had deliberately, maliciously forged my signature on a legal quitclaim deed. They had committed actual felony real estate fraud to steal my grandfather's inheritance from me, just so they could buy their golden, arrogant child a luxury sports car and fund a fake, doomed company. The horrible truth clicked into place. They kicked me out not to teach me a harsh lesson about independence, not because I was actually a burden. They kicked me out to get me out of the house, to remove me from the premises, so they could sell the property right under my nose, forge the legal documents, and steal my money without me noticing the real estate agents walking through the hallways. I hung up the phone on Fiona and stared blankly at the stained wall. The sheer sociopathic scale of their manipulation was absolutely breathtaking. I dialed my father's number. My blood was boiling, rushing in my ears like a waterfall. He answered on the very first ring, probably expecting me to be calling to beg for grocery money. "You sold the house," I said. No hello, no greeting, just pure venomous ice. There was a heavy, guilty pause on the line. I could hear the television playing in the background. "We did what we had to do for the survival and future of this family." "Julian," Victor said, his voice taking on that familiar, condescending tone. "Marcus has a real once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. His startup is going to make millions of dollars. The house was just sitting there doing nothing. You forged my signature on a legal document, Victor," I growled, dropping the title of Dad forever. "You committed fraud. You stole my inheritance, my legal right to buy that useless, arrogant idiot a Porsche." My father's voice turned incredibly nasty and aggressive. "I am investing the family money in the son with an actual future. You are a selfish, ungrateful, pathetic brat who only cares about himself. If you try to drag this family into a messy lawsuit, If you try to ruin your brother's life with lawyers over some old paperwork, I swear to God, Julian, I will use every connection I have to make sure you never work in this city or this industry ever again." He violently hung up the phone. 10 seconds later, my screen lit up. I got a text message from Marcus. It was a high-resolution photo of him leaning casually against a gleaming silver Porsche 911, wearing expensive designer sunglasses, holding the steering wheel. The caption underneath read, "Sucks to be you. Thanks for the ride. Move on, loser." I sat down heavily on the cold wooden floor of my empty, freezing apartment. I was shaking with an absolute primal rage. I could have called a lawyer right then and there. I could have walked into a police station and filed a criminal report for real estate fraud. But a lawsuit would take years of agonizing depositions, court dates, and legal fees. And my parents would just play the victim card to the entire town, crying about their vindictive youngest son. No, I did not want a messy, prolonged court battle. I wanted absolute, undeniable, instantaneous annihilation. They took my past and tried to illegally steal my future. But what they did not know was that I was already building an impenetrable empire in the shadows, and I was about to meticulously use their own greed, their own terrible financial decisions, to bury them alive. The toxic fallout from the fraudulent house sale rapidly rippled through the rest of my extended family, revealing exactly who everyone truly was beneath their polite Midwestern smiles. 2 days after the confrontation with Victor, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Aunt Beatrice. Aunt Beatrice was my mother's older sister, a woman who always baked me sugar cookies when I was a kid, and constantly pretended to be the sweet, neutral peacemaker of the entire extended family. "Oh, Julian, my poor sweet boy," Beatrice crooned into the phone, her voice dripping with thick, exaggerated theatrical pity. "I just heard the terrible news about the house sale from your mother. I am so terribly sorry your parents did that to you. It is just awful. Are you okay, honey? Where are you living now? Do you even have enough money to eat? It must be so hard living in the slums." I was genuinely about to tell her the truth. I was so starved for familial affection that I was about to lean on her for emotional support, to tell her about the air mattress and the ramen noodles. But then, very faintly in the background of her end of the call, I heard a very specific, distinct sound. It was the sharp, crisp clink of heavy ice cubes hitting a crystal whiskey glass. And then, following immediately after, a muffled, deep chuckle. It was my father's laugh. Aunt Beatrice wasn't calling from her own home to check on my well-being. She had me on speakerphone while sitting in my parents' newly rented, hyper-expensive luxury townhouse. She was acting as their willing spy, trying to gather miserable, pathetic details about my current life so they could sit around the living room, drinking expensive whiskey bought with my stolen inheritance and laughing at my pain. A cold, dead, hollow feeling settled permanently in the center of my chest. The last tiny thread tying me to my bloodline snapped. "I am doing just fine, Beatrice," I said, my voice incredibly smooth and devoid of any emotion. "In fact, I have never been better. Enjoy the whiskey." I hung up the phone before she could sputter a response and immediately blocked her number. I opened my contacts app and systematically, methodically went through the list. I blocked every single aunt, every uncle, every cousin. They were all infected by the same toxic loyalty to Victor and Sylvia. I had to cut the rot out of my life completely to survive. The brutal battlefield soon shifted directly from my personal life to my professional life. Marcus, incredibly high on his stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars and driving his new Porsche around town, decided he wanted to officially play the role of the big-shot tech CEO. And where did he decide to flaunt his stolen, fraudulent wealth? Right in the lobby of my own territory. I walked into our startup's sleek, modern lobby one rainy morning, holding a cup of coffee, and stopped dead in my tracks. Marcus was standing right by the main reception desk, He was wearing an incredibly flashy, custom-tailored Italian suit, casually spinning the keys to his Porsche around his index finger, making sure everyone saw the logo. Standing right next to him, laughing at one of his terrible jokes, was Derek, my deeply jealous and incompetent coworker. And sitting on the expensive leather waiting sofa, looking highly entertained and engaged, was Gavin. Gavin was an incredibly wealthy, highly influential angel investor who provided the crucial lifeblood funding for my company's most important projects. Marcus had not just come to gloat. He had specifically tracked Gavin down to my office building to aggressively poach him and steal our funding. "Julian, little brother," Marcus boomed, his voice echoing off the marble floors, deliberately ensuring the entire busy lobby heard him. He walked over, a predatory smile on his face, and clapped me incredibly hard on the shoulder, almost making me spill my coffee. "Just showing Gavin here what a real scalable tech infrastructure looks like. My new company is preparing for a massive multi-million-dollar Series A funding round next month. We are going to completely revolutionize the entire market." Derek smirked at me, crossing his arms. "Yeah, Julian, Marcus was just telling us how your back-end algorithms are a bit outdated and slow. He is offering Gavin a highly exclusive ground-floor equity stake in his new venture. You should probably take notes." They were actively trying to publicly humiliate me and steal my company's financial backing in one aggressive, coordinated move. Marcus was utilizing my grandfather's stolen inheritance money to project the grand illusion of massive success, and Derek was eagerly enabling him just to ruin my career out of sheer spite. I looked at Gavin. Gavin was a shrewd, ruthless businessman, but even he was momentarily blinded by the extreme flashiness of Marcus's presentation, the tailored suit, and the undeniable fact that Marcus possessed massive liquid capital to burn. In the tech world, money talks louder than logic. "Is that so?" I said calmly. I did not yell. I did not make a scene in front of the receptionists. I did not let them see a single ounce of fear or anger. I looked directly into Marcus's arrogant eyes. Building a secure, scalable back-end infrastructure is incredibly complicated, Marcus. It requires actual work, not just buzzwords. I truly hope your lead developers know exactly what they are doing, because the market does not forgive sloppy code. Marcus openly scoffed, rolling his eyes. "I hired the absolute best in the state with my capital. We launched the global beta in exactly 2 months. Try to keep up. See you around, kid." They walked out through the revolving glass doors, Derek looking incredibly smug and victorious. But they had made a massive, fatal miscalculation. They assumed I would crack under the immense pressure, that I would throw a tantrum or quit. Instead, I went back to my desk, put on my heavy noise-canceling headphones, locked out the entire world, and went to absolute war. For the next 3 grueling months, I practically lived at the office. Clara brought me takeout meals and forced me to drink water. Nolan checked in on me constantly, making sure I was sleeping at least a few hours. I funneled all my agonizing pain, all my burning rage, and all the soul-crushing betrayal into the lines of code on my screen. I was not just building an app update anymore, I was meticulously crafting a high-tech weapon. I completely rewrote our platform to be 10 times faster, infinitely more secure, and significantly cheaper to operate than anything Marcus and his team of hired mercenaries could ever dream of producing. My obsessive, relentless work did not go unnoticed. Harrison, the powerful CEO of the conglomerate I had successfully pitched to in Albuquerque, officially acquired our startup in a massive buyout. He recognized the sheer, undeniable brilliance of the architecture I had built. The day the acquisition was finalized, he called me into his massive, mahogany-paneled corner office on a Friday afternoon. "Julian, sit down," Harrison said, pouring 2 glasses of expensive sparkling water. He looked at me with deep respect. "Your new code is single-handedly dominating the entire market sector. You have financially destroyed 3 of our largest competitors this quarter alone. Your algorithms are flawless. Effective immediately, I am officially promoting you to Vice President of Special Acquisitions for the parent company. Your new salary and massive stock options will reflect this new authority." I looked down at the physical number printed on the legal contract he pushed across the heavy mahogany desk. It was life-changing. It was the kind of astronomical money that bought absolute untouchable freedom. However, there is one very specific, highly sensitive project I want you to personally manage. Harrison continued, his tone turning serious as he leaned forward, interlacing his fingers. There is a local tech startup that arrogantly tried to compete with us in the local sector. They burned through over $1 million of what appears to be questionable family money. Their highly publicized global beta launch completely crashed and burned yesterday due to catastrophic server failures. Their investors, including a man named Gavin, are fleeing in absolute panic. The company is completely bankrupt, facing multiple lawsuits, and the founders are drowning in massive, unrecoverable personal debt. We are currently in the process of buying up all of their toxic financial assets, their patents, and their debt for pennies on the dollar to liquidate them. Harrison slid a thick red file folder across the desk. I slowly opened it. Staring back at me, printed on the front page of the bankruptcy filing, was the flashy logo of Marcus's company. I meticulously read through the detailed financial summaries. It was a bloodbath. Marcus had arrogantly leveraged absolutely everything. He had taken out massive, high-interest personal loans using my parents, Victor and Sylvia, as the sole legal guarantors. Because his tech was fundamentally flawed, built on lies, and our superior product had cornered the entire market, his app was completely dead on arrival. The bank was aggressively preparing to seize absolutely everything to cover the debt, including my parents' rented luxury townhouse, their remaining retirement cash, and Marcus's precious, beloved Porsche. And my new firm was buying that exact debt, and I was the sole executive in charge of collecting it. They thought I was forever buried under their garbage bags at the gate. They thought they had left me with absolutely nothing. A broken ghost in a Walmart parking lot. But a seed needs dark, dirty dirt to grow, and my roots were about to crack their entire fraudulent foundation wide open. Exactly 1 month had passed since I was violently thrown out of my childhood home. 30 entire days had evaporated since I stood on the freezing, unforgiving pavement of my old neighborhood and looked at my entire 25 years of existence violently stuffed into heavy-duty black garbage bags. In the incredibly short span of those 30 days, the universe had completely flipped its axis, delivering a brand of poetic justice that no Hollywood screenwriter could ever possibly invent. I was sitting in my brand-new, massive, glass-walled corner office on the absolute top floor of the corporate headquarters. I was wearing a meticulously crafted, custom-tailored navy blue Italian suit that cost significantly more than my very first car. I was looking out over the sprawling, sunlit downtown skyline of Des Moines, watching the tiny cars move like ants on the streets below. I was officially the Vice President of Special Acquisitions. My new executive desk was massive, carved from incredibly heavy, dark walnut wood, and it was completely clear except for my high-end laptop and one single thick, blood-red legal file folder. That specific red folder contained the absolute, mathematical, undeniable financial ruin of my older brother. I had spent the last entire week meticulously reviewing the incredibly dense bankruptcy filings, the defaulted, high-interest bank loans, and the aggressive corporate foreclosure notices permanently tied to Marcus's fraudulent holotech startup. It was a spectacular, glorious, unmitigated disaster of epic proportions. Marcus had arrogantly burned through every single penny of my stolen inheritance, the massive real estate payout from our grandfather's house, and our parents' entire life retirement funds in a matter of mere weeks. The highly publicized global beta launch of his supposedly revolutionary application, which he had obnoxiously bragged about in the lobby of my old building, was a catastrophic, irrecoverable failure. The server architecture completely collapsed within the first 10 minutes of going live to the public. His major financial backers, including the incredibly wealthy angel investor Gavin, had immediately panicked and filed massive breach of contract lawsuits to aggressively recoup their capital. The entire fragile house of cards had violently collapsed, leaving nothing but a smoking crater of debt. And because my new parent conglomerate aggressively sought to eliminate any and all local market competition, we swooped in like corporate vultures. Harrison, my CEO, had authorized my department to buy up all of Marcus's toxic financial assets, his defaulted loans, and his company's worthless intellectual property for absolute pennies on the dollar. As I sat there in my luxurious leather chair, meticulously reviewing the final corporate liquidation strategy, my personal cell phone, resting quietly next to my sleek wireless keyboard, suddenly vibrated against the polished wood. The digital screen lit up brightly, displaying a specific contact name I had absolutely not seen since the horrifying day I was evicted like a stray dog. Mom. I simply stared at the glowing screen. My heart remained entirely steady. My pulse did not elevate. I did not feel the familiar sickening spike of childhood anxiety or the desperate, pathetic, ingrained need to answer the call to seek her elusive approval. I simply watched the phone ring silently until it automatically went to voicemail. 10 seconds later, the screen lit up and it rang again, and then again, and again. Over the course of the next 4 agonizingly long hours, as I casually drank my premium imported espresso and finalized the aggressive corporate acquisition strategy with my legal team, my mother called my cell phone exactly 44 times. She also sent an absolute barrage of frantic, grammatically incorrect, disjointed text messages that flooded my notification center. "Julian, please pick up the phone right now. We are in terrible, terrible trouble. Marcus's company hit a minor financial snag. The aggressive bank suddenly froze all of our checking accounts. We need your financial help immediately. Julian, you are our youngest son. We share the same blood. Please do not ignore your family in our ultimate hour of need. Where are you living?" The sheer, unadulterated audacity of her messages was almost mathematically impressive. She had cowardly stood behind a heavy bedroom curtain and silently watched my father throw me into the freezing street. She had eagerly signed off on felony real estate fraud to illegally steal my beloved grandfather's legacy. And now, exclusively because the stolen money had completely evaporated into thin air, she suddenly remembered she had a second son who possessed a steady salary. Out of morbid clinical curiosity, I finally decided to listen to the very last voicemail she left on my machine. Her voice was trembling violently, entirely stripped of its usual arrogant country club polish and condescending tone. "Julian, please, I am begging you. Your stubborn father will not admit it out loud, but we are completely, totally ruined. The bank is aggressively threatening to send repo men to take Marcus's car, and they are putting a lien on our luxury townhouse. We know you have a steady, reliable salary at that little tech startup in the East Village. We urgently need you to come to the bank and co-sign a massive bridge loan for us to stop the foreclosure. We are your family. Please, Julian, call me back right now." I calmly deleted the pathetic voicemail, locked my phone screen, and placed the device inside my tailored suit jacket pocket. I had a significantly more important engagement to attend to that evening. It was the highly anticipated night of the annual Midwest Tech Innovation Gala, the absolute most exclusive, high-profile corporate networking event of the entire year. The grand, sprawling ballroom of the downtown Marriott Hotel was absolutely packed to the brim with powerful venture capitalists, tech billionaires, local politicians, and industry leaders. I was attending this prestigious event not as an invisible junior developer fetching coffee, but as the recognized right-hand man to Harrison, the CEO of the most powerful, dominant conglomerate in the entire room. When I arrived at the luxurious venue, the atmosphere was incredibly electric. Massive, sparkling crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the vast sea of expensive, custom-tailored tuxedos and flowing designer gowns. Professional waiters wearing white gloves effortlessly carried heavy silver trays loaded with expensive vintage champagne and gourmet hors d'oeuvres. For the very first time in my entire 25 years of life, I actually belonged in a room like this. I was not hiding in the dark shadows. I was not pushing peas around my plate in silence. Powerful people were deliberately walking up to me, shaking my hand firmly, and congratulating me on the recent massive corporate acquisitions my specialized department had just aggressively pulled off. Clara, wearing an absolutely stunning floor-length emerald green silk dress, was standing proudly by my side, her intelligence and grace matching the energy of the room perfectly. No one had even managed to snag an exclusive invitation through his accounting firm and was standing across the massive room, thoroughly enjoying the premium open bar. I was standing near the main stage podium, deeply engaged in discussing complex global market trends with a prominent, highly respected corporate attorney, when the heavy oak double doors at the far back of the ballroom suddenly swung open with a loud, disruptive bang. The interruption was immediate and incredibly jarring to the elegant atmosphere. Walking aggressively through the doors, arguing loudly and obnoxiously with the venue security guards, were Victor, Sylvia, and Marcus. They looked absolutely, undeniably terrible. Victor was wearing an incredibly old, heavily wrinkled, ill-fitting tuxedo that looked like it had been violently pulled from the dusty back of a forgotten closet. Sylvia was wearing an outdated dress that was entirely too flashy and inappropriate for the highly elegant room, her heavy makeup applied thickly in a desperate attempt to hide the dark, exhausted, sunken circles under her terrified eyes. But Marcus, undeniably, looked the absolute worst of them all. The former golden child, the arrogant, self-proclaimed tech visionary who drove a Porsche, looked like a hollowed-out, pathetic shell of a human being. He was sweating profusely under the bright ballroom lights, his eyes darting nervously and frantically around the crowded room, like a trapped animal. He looked completely, utterly defeated by the crushing weight of his monumental failures. They had clearly used old, expired, completely invalid guest passes from Marcus's incredibly brief period of fake industry relevance to aggressively bluff their way past the confused front desk staff. They were desperately scanning the massive crowd with hungry, panicked eyes. And then, Victor's gaze locked directly onto me. His face instantly hardened into that deeply familiar, toxic mask of demanding, unquestionable patriarchal authority. He aggressively pushed his way past a group of highly respected software engineers, practically dragging my terrified mother and broken brother behind him like a crazed general leading a doomed infantry directly into a minefield. I calmly and politely excused myself from the corporate attorney I was speaking with and slowly turned around to face my toxic bloodline. Clara immediately stepped slightly behind me, her sharp eyes narrowing in extreme distaste as she instantly recognized their faces from the horrifying stories I had shared with her during my darkest nights. "Julian," Victor snapped aggressively, his harsh voice tight and deliberately loud, immediately attempting to establish his absolute dominance over me in the middle of the crowded, quiet ballroom. "We have been calling your damn cell phone all entire day. Why the hell are you ignoring your own mother's desperate phone calls? Do you have any idea what we are going through?" I took a slow, deliberate, incredibly calm sip of my imported sparkling water, letting the silence stretch out uncomfortably before I finally spoke. "Hello, Victor, Sylvia, Marcus," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the low hum of the ballroom. "You are actively crashing a highly exclusive private corporate event. You are not on the guest list. You need to turn around and leave immediately before I have the building security forcefully escort you out into the street." Victor's face turned a violent, dangerous shade of purple. He stepped aggressively forward, invading my personal space, lowering his voice into a harsh, venomous, threatening whisper. "Do not ever speak to me like that, you arrogant, ungrateful little brat. We are your family. We share the same blood. We are currently in a temporary, incredibly stressful financial bind, and you are going to help us right now. I know you finally got a minor, pathetic promotion at your little startup company. You are going to leave this stupid party. You are going to come to the bank with me first thing tomorrow morning, and you are going to use your new salary to co-sign a massive personal loan for Marcus. He urgently needs heavy capital to restructure his app and appease his angry investors. I actually laughed out loud. It was a cold, sharp, genuinely amused sound that made Marcus physically flinch backward. You honestly want me to take out a massive bank loan for the exact same brother who stood by and smirked while you threw my entire life into plastic garbage bags? Sylvia desperately reached out, her hands shaking violently, and tightly grabbed my forearm. Her grip was incredibly desperate, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my expensive suit jacket. Julian, please. You absolutely have to understand our position. Your father made a slight, unfortunate financial miscalculation. We used the house money to help your brother, and now the aggressive bank is threatening a massive, devastating lawsuit against us. They are going to take absolutely everything we own. You have a moral duty to this family. You are our beloved son. I officially stopped being your son the exact second you forged my legal signature on a quitclaim deed to illegally steal my grandfather's real estate inheritance, I said, my voice dropping to a freezing, utterly lethal register that completely froze the blood in her veins. I know exactly how you sold the Sherman Hill house behind my back. I know you committed federal real estate fraud to buy Marcus a useless sports car. Victor visibly panicked, his arrogant facade cracking rapidly as his eyes darted around the quiet room to see if any of the surrounding executives were listening to my accusations. Keep your damn voice down, Julian, he hissed, genuine fear finally entering his eyes. That was a legal gray area. It was family money. You have absolutely no solid proof of any wrongdoing, and no respectable attorney would ever take that ridiculous case. Now stop throwing a pathetic childhood tantrum and act like a real man. You are going to help us financially, or I swear to God, I will loudly ruin your professional reputation in this room tonight. He was still desperately trying to bully me. He honestly, truly believed he still held the ultimate power in our dynamic. He thought I was still the terrified, submissive 25-year-old kid living in his dark shadow, desperate for a single crumb of his paternal approval. He had absolutely no idea that he had just aggressively walked directly into a massive, steel-jawed corporate trap of his own making. You are going to ruin my professional reputation? I asked, a slow, incredibly dangerous, predatory smile spreading across my face. I looked directly over Victor's shoulder and made deliberate, sustained eye contact with Harrison, who was standing confidently near the main stage podium, watching the entire interaction. Harrison gave me a brief, sharp, highly approving nod. Victor, I said softly, stepping closer to my father so he could hear every single devastating syllable clearly over the ambient noise. You do not have the power to ruin anything anymore, because you do not own anything anymore. Not your house, not your car, not even your own massive debt. Before Victor could even begin to process the crushing weight of my ominous words, the massive, state-of-the-art ballroom speakers loudly crackled to life. A profound, respectful hush instantly fell over the entire massive crowd of elites as the bright, piercing stage spotlights illuminated the main mahogany podium. Harrison, looking like absolute untouchable corporate royalty in his bespoke tuxedo, tapped the microphone twice to command attention. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished corporate guests, and esteemed industry partners. Harrison's incredibly deep, authoritative voice echoed flawlessly through the massive room. Thank you so much for joining us tonight to celebrate a phenomenal year of unprecedented, record-breaking financial growth. Tonight, before we commence the dinner service, I have the distinct honor and incredible privilege of making two massive, highly anticipated announcements regarding the aggressive future expansion of our corporate conglomerate. Victor angrily crossed his arms over his chest, glaring at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. I do not care about some boring, long-winded corporate speech from your boss, Julian. We are leaving this ridiculous party right now, and you are coming with us to figure out this disastrous bank situation. Shut your mouth and listen to him, I commanded, my voice slicing through the tense air between us like a freshly sharpened razor blade. Marcus stared at me, his jaw literally dropping open, completely and utterly shocked by the sheer, unyielding authority and absolute dominance in my tone. I was no longer the submissive ghost he used to mock. "First," Harrison continued enthusiastically from the brightly lit stage, his eyes scanning the quiet room, "I want to officially and publicly introduce the absolute newest member of our global executive board. He is the brilliant, unmatched architectural genius behind our incredibly successful new global software infrastructure that has completely revolutionized the market. He is a young man of unparalleled visionary talent and absolute terrifying operational ruthlessness. Please join me in congratulating our new Vice President of Special Acquisitions, Mr. Julian Price." The entire massive ballroom erupted into thunderous applause as Harrison publicly introduced me as the new Vice President of Special Acquisitions. And in that exact moment, Victor, Sylvia, and Marcus finally understood that the son they had thrown away was no longer powerless. Victor looked like a ghost. Sylvia gasped as if the air had been punched from her lungs, and Marcus stood frozen, completely stripped of the arrogance he had worn like armor for years. But Harrison was not finished. He announced that our acquisitions department had successfully taken over and liquidated a failed local competitor called Apex Innovations, the company Marcus had built with stolen inheritance money and reckless loans. Harrison revealed that the company had filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy after a disastrous product launch, and that my department had purchased every toxic asset, every defaulted loan, and every worthless piece of intellectual property tied to it. Marcus finally realized the truth. I was the faceless corporate force that now owned his company's debt, his personal loans, the lien on the luxury townhouse, and the repossession rights to his Porsche. Sylvia broke down in front of everyone, begging me to remember that they were my blood, that they had raised me, and that they would be homeless if I refused to help. But I told her the truth. A mistake was forgetting a bill or burning dinner. What they had done was not a mistake. They had watched me be thrown out like trash, forged my signature, stolen my grandfather's inheritance, and sacrificed everything I had so Marcus could pretend to be a king. Victor tried one final time to threaten me, saying I would be dead to the family forever if I walked away. I smiled, because the son he was trying to control had already died at the gate, surrounded by garbage bags. The man standing before him was the wealthy vice president who owned their debt. I handed Victor a legal envelope containing the forensic handwriting analysis, proving the forged quitclaim deed, and the documents my attorney had already filed with the district attorney. I warned them never to contact me, come to my home, appear at my office, or crash another event, or my legal team would press maximum criminal charges. Then I looked at Marcus and told him to enjoy the long walk home, because the repo men had already taken his Porsche. I turned away with Clara beside me and left them standing terrified in the middle of the crowd, drowning in the consequences of their own greed. Over the next 6 months, the financial machinery destroyed them without me needing to lift another finger. The bank foreclosed on the luxury townhouse. Victor and Sylvia were forced to liquidate what remained of their retirement accounts to settle the civil case and avoid prison for the forged deed. Their marriage collapsed into a bitter divorce filled with blame, lawsuits, and humiliation. Victor ended up in a tiny, cheap apartment on the far edge of Des Moines, working nights as a security guard at a freezing industrial warehouse just to afford groceries. Sylvia, who had once looked down on my career and treated me like a burden, ended up bagging groceries at a discount store. Marcus's fall was just as public and complete. His reputation in the local tech world was ruined beyond repair. No serious company would hire him after the bankruptcy, the fraud, and the failed launch. The last I heard, he was working as a barista in a chain coffee shop, wearing a green apron and struggling to pay off the IRS penalties his own arrogance had created. His Porsche was auctioned off by my department for a fraction of what he owed. They were not just financially ruined, they were trapped inside the wreckage of the false kingdom they had built by stealing from me. I felt no guilt, but I also felt no wild joy. What I felt was peace. The toxic family tumor had finally been removed from my life. Healing, however, did not happen instantly. 2 days after the gala, I began therapy with Dr. Harris, a psychologist who specialized in family trauma, childhood neglect, and narcissistic abuse. I told him everything: the garbage bags, the favoritism, the stolen inheritance, the forged documents, and the strange guilt I still felt after protecting myself. He told me something that changed my life. I had not destroyed my family. They had destroyed themselves, poured gasoline over their own lives, and demanded that I stay quiet while they burned me too. Week by week, therapy helped me dismantle the belief that my worth depended on service, sacrifice, or solving other people's disasters. 6 months later, I bought my own home, a peaceful mid-century modern house in a quiet wooded suburb, far from the noise and poison of my past. I filled it not with empty luxury, but with chosen family. Nolan came over often for weekend barbecues. Penelope, a brilliant software engineer I met through work, brought joy and chaos to our dinner parties. And Clara, the woman who had helped me when I was sleeping on a sofa and later stood beside me at the gala, became my partner in every meaningful sense. Our relationship grew from respect, trust, and real love, not guilt or obligation. About a year after the confrontation, a cheap white envelope arrived in the mail with Victor's shaky handwriting on the front. A year earlier, I would have opened it with desperate hope. But standing in my own beautiful home, listening to Clara humming in the kitchen, I realized I did not care what it said. Whether it was an apology or another plea for money, his words had no power over me anymore. I fed the unopened letter into my paper shredder and watched it disappear into confetti. Then I walked back to Clara and kissed the top of her head, finally free. My greatest revenge was not buying their debt, repossessing the Porsche, or exposing the fraud. It was becoming emotionally indifferent to people who once controlled my entire sense of worth. True independence is not just money, a title, or a beautiful house. It is the moment you understand that your value belongs to you alone. You do not need permission, validation, or conditional love from people who only know how to use you. I became the architect of my own destiny, and the life I built without them became more powerful than any apology they could ever offer.